Do we stop the recording?
Yes, we should.
Whoever is recording.
All the best. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Greetings from India. A very warm welcome from Nivaran to all the students, peacemakers, and peace dreamers who have joined us today from different time zones for this fourth day of the International Virtual Mediation Summer School 2022. Nivaran is a group of mediators from the Supreme Court of India, led by the dynamic Mr. Santana Krishnan, a passionate mediator, Mr. Rajiv Datta, Mr. Rakesh Khanna, and Mr. Jitinder Sharma, senior advocates and mediators at the Supreme Court of India. I am Shirin Khajuria, advocate and mediator at the Supreme Court of India, and it's my privilege and honor to be your host and moderator. My co-host is Mr. Sanjay Visen, also a Supreme Court advocate and mediator. The topic for today is communication skills needed for a mediator. Our guest speaker, Professor Joel Lee, whom I have the honor and the pleasure of introducing, will be talking specifically about enhancing communication with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. It's possibly something very new to us in India, at least. Since we have a mixed audience today of students and young mediators, it may be useful to have an overview of the concept of communication in mediation before our guest speaker, Mr. Joel Lee, takes us to the topic of NLP. Communication is a two-way process which enables the parties to exchange their ideas and express themselves. Conflicts arise when communication fails. That's where a mediator steps in. Broadly, there are two ways of mediation: verbal and non-verbal. Verbal communication is what you say and how you say it. Use positive vocabulary, upbeat, energetic, and professional tone. Non-verbal communication is the way that you present yourself to the parties. Dress formally, yet look approachable and professional. An open body language, such as sitting back in the chair without crossing your arms, shows the mediator is relaxed and approachable. Also, how the mediator arranges the room and positions himself between the parties can be very telling. Communication is inherent in the word mediation. We can use the letters of the word mediation to describe the elements of communication. M, mindful and meaningful communication. Different people react to stimuli differently. Professor Gerd Hofstede, in his theory of 6 dimensions of culture, reminds us to be mindful of the societal differences which can lead to miscommunication. In certain societies, it may not be looked upon rightly for a lady to make an eye contact with the man. Also, it may be a boss culture where the boss speaks only or he speaks first. Be mindful that the language doesn't become a barrier. Use the language of the parties. In case they are more comfortable with maybe the Hindi language or any regional language, it may be better to communicate in that. Clear, concise communication aids successful mediation. E is for empathy. Put yourselves into the shoes of the parties. I'm sure this is a word all of you mediators have heard most often. It involves active listening, not just with your ears, but also with your heart and your eyes. It is especially important during venting of emotion by the parties, which is an essential process of healing through communication. Let me caution you, don't let empathy extend to a level that neutrality is lost. Right and wrong have no place in mediation. Use non-committal expressions or words like, go on, I see, to ensure that neutrality is maintained. The next word is D, D for demeanor. How you are impacts the parties. Maintain neutrality, the voluntary nature of mediation, and confidentiality by your demeanor. Remain calm, relaxed, keep an eye contact with the parties. It may be good to position yourself between the parties rather than their lawyers, because it subconsciously reminds the parties that they have the power to decide. I for inspire. Inspire confidence and trust in the parties by your words and conduct, so that they can open up without fear. Be respectful and remain calm throughout, even when emotions run high, which is very likely in a mediation. Remember, brilliant things can happen in calm minds. A, assist parties in analyzing their issues and finding a solution. Show them the mirror, break up big things into small parts, and show them a future without conflict. Empower them. T, timing. There is a right time to speak and a right time to be silent. Don't be afraid of silence. Mediator and parties can use it as a tool to gather their thoughts, to analyze, and to express their thoughts. In case the parties are getting exhausted, you notice, please break or postpone the session. I is for insight. Get an insight into the parties by observing them. Be aware how emotions affect people and how they respond to solutions. Use different types of questions, open-ended, close-ended, clarifying questions, interrogative. Identify the real issues between the parties and figure out the real interests of the parties. O is for optimism, which is infectious. A mediator must exude positivity with the use of high power words and tone, besides his mannerism. Make the parties believe until the end that a resolution is possible. The last letter, N, for noise. Cut out the noise. Distractions, conflicting messages, biases, and blind spots are everywhere. As Daniel Kahneman, the author of the book Noise, says, to fight the noise, we must first admit that it exists. Focus on the interest of the parties and the issues, and not on the people or their positions. Move parties from reactive to a thinking state. Once the real issues and the interests are clear, the resolution is easy. N is also for NLP, on which our distinguished speaker, Mr. Joel Lee, will be speaking about today. Joel Lee is a professor at the Faculty of Law, the National University of Singapore. Joel co-pioneered the teaching of negotiation and mediation in the Singapore universities and has played a significant role in furthering and development of mediation in Singapore, not just education, but in practice. A graduate of Victoria University of Wellington and Harvard Law Schools, Joel is a partner with CMP Cambridge, USA, and a principal mediator with the Singapore Mediation Center. Joel was a member of the International Mediation Institute's Independent Standards Commission and Intercultural Task Force. He was also a key member of the Ministry of Law's Working Group on International Commercial Mediation. Joel is presently the founding chair of the board of Singapore International Mediation Institute. He is also a certified trainer of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, which is the topic of discussion today. Joel has taught overseas at the University of Copenhagen, University of Law, Economics and Science at Aix-Marseille, France, and Anglia Law School, UK. He is the co-editor and co-author of the book An Asian Perspective on Mediation and the Singapore Mediation Handbook, and the general editor for the Asian Journal on Mediation. Woof. In 2011, Joel was awarded the Outstanding Educator Award, which is the National University of Singapore's highest teaching award. Joel, can I share a fun fact about you? You're a trained magician. Can we request you to show a trick or two after this talk?
I'm afraid that might be a little bit challenging to do because I would have needed to make preparations. But the next time, I promise.
Next time we would do that. Can I now request Mr. Joel Lee to expound on the topic for today? Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Shirin, for that very kind introduction. I wasn't actually expecting you to read all of that, but I appreciate it very much. Thank you. And my thanks to Nivaran for inviting me to speak today. Good evening to all my friends who are in India and who have taken the time to attend. I also can see from the list of names that there are probably some friends from outside of India. So good morning or good afternoon, as it may be appropriate wherever you are. So thank you so much for dialing in and joining us here today. A couple of things that I just want to get out of the way before we begin. It gets very lonely talking via Zoom. I assume all of you have had that experience the last 2 or 3 years. So feel free to please, say hello in the chat, do a shout out. From time to time, I will actually look at the chat. It keeps me engaged with the rest of you out there. And it doesn't make me feel like I'm talking to this little green light that is at the top of my computer screen. So I hope you will do that for me. And I will look at the things from time to time. You may also put in questions in the chat, but may I suggest actually, because if you're going to put in other things, maybe you can leave your questions till the end so that it makes it easier for our facilitators to identify when they can look at the question. So that'd be all right. So don't type in your questions yet, just write it down somewhere. And let me also give you a heads up. I will be asking you to do a particular task a little bit later. So you might want to have some paper and a pen in front of you, or maybe your phone ready to just type in some data. I will get in. I want to get your input from you via the chat. Okay. So just all that just to frame the conversation. I give you 2 warnings first. Can I just warn you about 2 things? The first thing I have to warn you about is that in Singapore we speak very quickly, and I apologize for that in advance. I'm making a conscious effort to slow down, but if I do get excited and start talking very quickly, Shirin, if you could do me a favor, just unmute yourself and say, either slow down or shut up. It's fine. Both work for me. Okay, and I'll remember to do that. So hopefully you won't have to do that. The second thing I got to warn you about is I tell very bad jokes. I'm sure it is a medical condition, right? And so feel free to laugh. Feel free to put haha in the chat. And if you don't find funny, just put in haha anyway, because either that or I'll just sit here laughing at my own jokes, and I just seem a bit crazy doing that. Is that okay? All right. So I'm just going to shift now to my slides, and I'll do my best not to read slides out to you if I can. But I think there's valuable information in these slides. I'd like to sort of share them with you. So I assume that everybody can see these slides and fairly straight. So today I want to talk about enhancing communication skills with NLP. And specifically with NLP, those of you who had dialed in a little bit earlier have heard me say that I had a misspent youth doing many things, learning many things. And one of the things is in NLP. A lot of the time when people talk about communication, they think it is just about talking. But we as trained mediators, we know, right, that it's not just about talking. It's never just about talking, right? What we say is often not quite as important as how we say it, or even when we say it, or who we say it to, right? So there are many aspects of communication that can be very, very nuanced. And I'm very grateful that Shirin has covered, the notions of the nonverbal and the verbal. I love how she used the word mediation and use that as a mnemonic to help us remember some things. And that's great. And I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into some of these aspects of communication, which I hope you will find helpful. And if you don't find it helpful, at least I hope you find it entertaining. Right. I'm going to start off with a few assumptions. And the assumptions that I'm going to make here is that everybody in this audience is familiar with mediation. Right. I'm going to assume that you know what that is. So we all start on that page. I'm not going to go through that. Right. And we all understand the importance of communication skills. Right. One of your key skill sets for any mediator, any professional communicator is communication skills. And I'm going to assume you possess foundational skills in terms of communication, things like active listening, things like passive, what we would say, open-ended questions, closed-ended questions, those kinds of things, right? So I'm not going to touch on all that, okay? What I'm going to touch on firstly is to give you a little bit of a quick introduction as to what NLP is, as well as three very fundamental applications which you can use from NLP today. In other words, at the end of today's talk, right, which should take about 45 minutes, 50 minutes, when you're done, you should be able to take these three tips and immediately apply them, all right? You might need a little bit of practice to get them right, but immediately apply them. Now, I see that somebody has raised their hand, and I just want to, it's Mr. Prasad Sharma, is that right? Do you have a question or do you need me to slow down? Is that, would you like to unmute yourself and?
Seems to be by mistake, Joel. I think
Oh, by mistake. All right, all right, all right.
For some time.
Okay, okay. But you see that one of the lovely things about NLP is we say sensory acuity. You need to always be aware of the room. And when someone raises their hand, you need to be aware of it. You may not always have to call on it, but you be aware of it. Now, so before I share with you what NLP is, I got to tell you, I could talk about this for days, right? I could, and I'm trying very hard not to, right? So I hope you understand that we're really going to really just touch the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about NLP. But as I said, hopefully it'll be valuable to you. Now, because I am a professor at law school, I feel the obligation to give you a proper definition. Right. Later, I'll give you the improper definition later, but the proper definition of NLP is neuro-linguistic programming. And now most people are actually quite frightened by these words because firstly, so many syllables, and it just sounds, you know, wow, what does all that mean? It's actually a very nice fancy way of saying that NLP studies how our brain and our language interact to create habits. So neuro refers to our nervous system, the way our experience is processed through our five senses. Linguistic refers to our verbal and non-verbal communication systems through which those experiences are stored and given meaning. And programming is the identifying, using, and changing of the patterns in our nervous system to achieve our goals. Now, the word programming is the one that really frightens a lot of people because they think it's like brainwashing and all of that. Right. So folks, I'm going to ask you to do an experiment with me, if you don't mind. And I think it will be very quickly illustrate what programming actually means. For those of you at home, if you're in a place that you're able to do this, if you're driving, please do not do this. But if you're comfortable, safe at home, please do this. Could you sit back, relax, and cross your arms for me? Just go ahead and cross your arms. And humor me, please. Go ahead and cross your arms. And so I'll give you about 5 seconds to do that, because there are always some people who are a little bit slow and unwilling. All right, excellent. Now, folks, I'd like you to freeze. Do not move, freeze. I'd like you to look down and notice whether your left arm is over your right or your right arm is over your left. There's no right answer to this, so please don't worry. Now, in a moment, I'd like you to uncross your arms and cross them the other way. And go ahead and do that now. And we've successfully done it. Please freeze. Do not move, freeze. Got it? Cool. Now, I'd like you to look down and notice one of two things. Some of you think you've crossed your arms the other way, but you probably haven't. Now, you don't have to tell me who you are, that's okay. For those of you who successfully cross your arms the other way, for how many of you does it feel a little bit unnatural? Could I just see a quick show of hands? Thank you, of those I can see, right? It feels a little bit unnatural. And so I've got to tell you that that's perfectly normal. Science tells us that 95% of our human behavior is habitual. In other words, we do the same things in the same sequence, in the same way over and over. How we sit, how we put on our clothes, what time we wake up, how we communicate. And which takes us then back to these slides, which is programming basically refers to our human habitual patterns of communication, right? And so one of the challenging things about teaching adults about communication skills, and I'm sure some of you found it, is because you've been communicating all your life. So when you're trying to learn a new way to communicate or a different way to communicate, it feels unnatural. What that actually means is that it's just not habit for you. It's not familiar. The good news is if you actually practice that skill diligently for about 3, 7, or 21 days, it becomes natural. It feels familiar, right? So a couple of things that I was going to ask you to do today is going to feel a little bit unnatural. Don't worry about it. It's absolutely human, and that's okay. All right. So give you a little bit of background about what NLP is, because I think that's helpful. It's the brainchild of two people. One was a linguist called Professor John Grinder. He was a professor of transformational linguistics. And I think some of his books are still in print. And the NLP was also the brainchild of a Dr. Richard Bandler. I put down there him as a scientist, but actually Richard Bandler was many things. He was an editor, a very talented communicator, a rock and roll musician. In the 70s, he also took drugs, but essentially he was also a student of human behavior. Now, in the 70s, John Grinder and Richard Bandler asked themselves a very important question. They asked themselves, what is the difference between somebody who is an exquisite communicator? Now, folks, think for a moment. Do you know anybody in your life, maybe it's yourself, who is an exquisite communicator? These are experts in communicating. These are the people that, it's like honey will flow down from their mouth. They can open their hand and a bird will fly down and land on their hand, right? These are the people you love to hate because they can't seem to say anything wrong. I wish I was one of those. Right. And so John Grinder and Richard Bandler asked themselves a very important question. What's the difference between somebody who's such an exquisite communicator and somebody who so sucks in their communication? In communication studies, the term so sucks is a technical term. When somebody is not very good at what they do, we say they so suck at it, right? And so I'm sure you know people like that, right? They have what we call foot in mouth syndrome, right? They open their mouth to put their foot in it, and then they open it long enough to take that one out and put the other one in it, right? These are the people who, even when they're paying you a compliment, somehow tend to offend you. They don't mean anything by it, it's just somehow they got it that way, right? John Grinder, Richard Bandler says, what's the difference between somebody who's an exquisite communicator and somebody who so sucks in the communication? Well, back in the 70s, they all believed it was in your genes. Now, I'm not wearing jeans today, so it's not in my genes. But what I will tell you is that they decided they were going to study the three most exquisite communicators that existed at that point in time. They, through a process called modeling, studied three people: Virginia Satir, who is known as the mother of systemic family therapy; Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy; and a gentleman named Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson was a medical doctor who, until his death in 1980, was the world's foremost medical clinical hypnotherapist, right? And why they chose to study Virginia, Fritz, and Milton was simply this. They were able to talk to people, interact with people, and able to persuade them to make changes in their lives, significant life-changing events. And they figure, wow, if you can do that, you must be an excellent communicator. Now, I could tell you stories about Virginia and Fritz Perls and Milton Erickson, but fundamentally, John and Richard studied these three people and realized an important thing. Even though Satir, Perls, and Erickson practice very different forms of therapy, they behaviorally did things which were very similar. What John and Richard realized is that if they took these patterns of behavior that each of these three communicators did and tried it on themselves, it instantly improved their ability to communicate. What they also realized is if they took this information and they taught it to somebody else, it instantly improved their ability to communicate. So the field of NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, was born. Now, tonight, I'm going to be sharing with you a number of ideas and three techniques. But NLP is more than those techniques. NLP is about the modeling of human excellence. John Grinder and Richard Bandler have gone on since the 70s to model excellent negotiators, excellent mediators, excellent teachers, excellent parents, excellent managers, excellent doctors. And so there have been the whole field of NLP has been born. But essentially, it is about the study, the systematic study of human excellence. All right. Okay. Now, I want to give you a big picture perspective of the ways NLP can be applied to mediation. Right. I've, off the top of my head, listed 7 items on this flip chart. There are probably more if I think about it a little bit harder. Okay. But fundamentally, it can be used to enhance communication, build rapport, address perceptions and bias, use language purposefully, reframing, personality preferences, how do you persuade different types of people? And one thing which is actually very important to all of us, I think as mediators, is self-management and self-care, right? We spend so much time dealing with other people's conflict that we very often don't take care of ourselves, right? And when I was in Delhi quite some years ago now, and I visited the mediation center there at the High Court, I noticed that they had a meditation room, and I actually thought it was a spelling error until I asked one of the mediators. The mediator says, no, it's the meditation room, because as mediators, sometimes before a mediation or after a mediation, we go there to gather ourselves. We go there to meditate, right? So self-care and self-management, I think, is something that we don't really look at very much, and that we want to. Now, you will notice on this slide that I have covered, I've put in bold 2 bullet points: enhancing communication and building rapport, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. We will not have time to talk about the rest. Perhaps we have an opportunity at some future point in time, right? So if everybody is ready to now jump into this field of NLP, please put on your seatbelts. All right, drink some water if you need to mentally prepare yourself, because we're about to begin. And I'd like to start off with the notion of what we call the NLP communication model, right? And for this sort of segment, actually, I think I would like to get the assistance of Visen. Visen, I see you on with your camera on. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, sir? Visen, can you hear me? Excellent. Visen, would you mind if you turned on your mic? Is that possible? Yes. Excellent, Visen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spotlight you for everyone. I know it's going to make you feel self-conscious, but don't worry, it's just for a short while. Okay, so Visen, do me a favor. I'm going to ask you a question. It's a deep question, all right? It's a very deep question. I apologize for that. Okay, but I hope you don't mind, right? Visen, how do you know I exist? I told you it was going to be deep.
Yes. A very good question for me. I like to answer like this, that I exist when I see something, I touch something, I feel something, I feel the importance of effectiveness of words said by the persons or the animals or the birds chirping, and
Nice.
even going into the environment of natural habitat, flowing water, sound also.
Excellent.
Feel that I exist.
Thank you, Visen. That's the perfect answer, right, folks? If you were listening carefully, and I'm gonna remove the spotlight so Visen can sort of be with the rest of the group now. If you were listening to Visen, you will realize that he said a few things, right? The way he would know that anything exists, including myself, is that firstly he can see me. Secondly, he can hear me, right? If we were meeting in person, he could touch me, obviously with my consent, but yes, he can touch me, right? If I have not taken a shower for 5 days, he could probably smell me. Don't worry, Visen, I have showered recently, so it's okay, right? Now, we all know that there is a 5th sense. We all know that there's a 5th sense, right? We got sight, hearing, touch, smell. I'm not going to go with this 5th sense, but theoretically, right, the other way you know where I exist is you could taste me, right? The only way that any of us can know that something exists is through our 5 senses, right? Now, I'm sure we have medical instruments and scientific instruments that can measure reality in other ways, infrared and so on and so forth. But for us, as human beings, through our unaided 5 senses, that's the only way we know something exists. Now, I'm not going to have an argument with anybody about the 6th sense, nonsense, or the sense of humor, right? We're just really going to be talking about the 5 senses. So if you think about it then, imagine that this is the side of your head. All right. I know most of you have more hair than this, and that's great, but just imagine this is the side of your head. And in NLP, we proceed on what we call the NLP communication model, right, as a way of understanding how information is processed. So you will see on the right side of the screen the notion of external experience. In other words, the world exists. The world exists, right? But here's the problem. Here's the problem. Information scientists estimate that at any point in time, over 2 billion bits of information bombarded our nervous system. Some people estimate it in the trillions. I don't know how they get that number. Somebody counts clearly. Okay, but fundamentally they say over 2 billion, right? That's a lot, right? Our eyes alone take in millions and millions at any point in time. The psychologists estimate that our conscious attention span, our conscious mind, can only handle 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information at any one point. That's 5 to 9. So imagine for a moment, 2 billion bits, 7 plus or minus 2. Psychologists also estimate that if we became aware of all the 2 billion bits at the same time, we will go crazy. So NLP says, in order for us to remain sane, the 2 billion bits of external experience, before they can be stored in our mind, have to go through a number of filters. In other words, 2 billion bits have to be filtered out such that only 7 plus or minus 2 is paid attention to, right? You don't have to take my word for it. Let's run an experiment. As you're sitting there listening to me telling you about the NLP communication model, I know some of you are taking notes. Some of you are probably wondering, I wonder what's for dinner. You're probably not aware of the feeling in your left toe until now. Now you're aware of the feeling in your left toe. I hope it's comfortable. You might feel it's a little bit warm. You might feel it's a little bit moist. And if you do not have a left toe, I apologize. Obviously, I didn't know that, okay? But the fact is that your left toe was always there. You were not paying attention to it because you were paying attention to something else. So all the signals that were coming from your left toe and your right finger and your arm, all of that, okay, was being filtered out because it was not relevant to you at that point in time. Which means that the internal representation, what we call an internal representation, you may call it a picture in your mind, is really only a shadow of reality. It's really only a shadow of reality. Reality is 2 billion bits, however much that is. Your internal representation is just a mere shadow of that. Now, here's the funny thing. How many of you have had this experience that you want to describe something that's inside your head, but you don't have the words for it? Your words fail you. Have you ever had that experience? It's quite a common experience, right? And this is because the words that we use, before they become words, our internal representation still goes through those filters again. So that the words that we use are a mere shadow of reality. I'll say that again. Our internal representations are a shadow of reality. The words that we use are a mere shadow of reality, right? Which means that just because I say to Shirin, Shirin, it's a pleasure to meet you and an honor to be here. I believe in having a win-win working relationship, and I hope we're in this for the long haul. Now, Shirin hears that, and she probably thinks, I kind of like the sound of that. I like that. Does Shirin know what I mean? The answer is actually no. She has no clue what I actually mean. All Shirin knows is what she thinks I mean, or what she means. Because the words that I use, even though it's the same word that Shirin hears, does not necessarily connect in Shirin's mind to the same internal representation or the same reference external experience. In NLP, we call this the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. The words that we use do not accurately represent what's inside our head. What's inside our head does not accurately represent what's external to us, right? So the map is not the territory. Now, this is captured in what we call the NLP presuppositions of communication. Virginia Satir, Fritz Perls, and Milton Erickson behaviorally embodied these presuppositions. And I'd like to quickly share these with you, right? I remember I was just saying to our friends before we started, today is Singapore's National Day. So we're celebrating 57 years of independence, right? And some of you may know that every male in Singapore has to go through military service. We serve 2 to 2.5 years, depending on when we served, right? And I'd like to share with you a funny story. I was in the military service, and I had a buddy. I had a buddy that wasn't the smartest guy. He was not the sharpest tack in the box, right? But he had very good self-esteem. He thought very highly of himself. So one day we were given a map, and we were said, okay, you are at this location on the map. You need to get yourself to this secondary location, A to B, and you needed to do it within 30 minutes. You need to do it without getting caught by the enemies, right? The enemies were our trainers who were pretending to be enemies. So my friend got the map, took it from me. He said, Joel, you're very bad at reading maps, which is true. I will get us there. You just make sure that that you look for the enemies. So he was very, very pompous about it. He took his map and he went left and right, and carry on straight. So he navigated us. And at one point he said, listen, Joel, we're almost there. We're almost there. Let's go, because we might be the first. We might get rewarded for being the first. And I stopped moving. I looked at him. I said, no, I'm not moving. And he looked irritatedly at me. He says, what's wrong with you? And I said, I'm not moving. He says, we're almost there. I can hear the people coming. What's wrong with you? We're almost there. And I said, I'm not moving. And he was getting upset with me. And I said, listen, put the stupid map down and look. And he put the map down, he looked, and there was a 16-foot drop in front of us. My friend looked at the drop, he looked at the map. He looked at the drop, he looked at the map, and then he said, but that's not on the map. I'm a geography student. I understood erosion. The map is not the territory. The words that we use do not always accurately represent the world, and certainly never accurately represents what they think of it. Which leads us to the second presupposition of communication. The meaning of your communication is the response you get. So Shirin, I know that you were talking about your husband, Sanjay. I'm married, here's my ring. But can we do a role play? Is that all right, Shirin? Right. So everybody, if I said to Shirin, I love you. And Shirin stands up, looks at me with hatred in her face and goes, you love me, you bastard, and she slaps me. Right. Now, I have a couple of choices at that point in time. Right. I could think to myself, she's crazy. She's psychotic, she's a psycho. I could think that. I could think that she obviously is just nuts. I paid her a compliment, even if she does not reciprocate. Surely calling me a bastard and slapping me on the face is a bit much, right? Now that's one possibility. One option is I could do that, right? But what we need to understand is the meaning of our communication, what we intend, doesn't matter. We intended to communicate something, but what is very important is, what did Shirin receive? What message did she get? Because if I intended to communicate something positive and she received something negative, then actually that communication was negative, regardless of my intention. From NLP's perspective, we say, well, it's not their fault. We need to find a different way. Right? And I'll say a little bit more about that. Right? Now, one option is for me to think she's crazy. The other option is for me to go, I'll never love again. I've tried, I've loved, I've tried, I failed. Better to have loved and lost and all of that, right? But from a professional communicator's perspective, this is what we must say. There is no failure, only feedback. In other words, if we get a response from the person that we are communicating with, and it is not the response we hope for, we simply take that as feedback. We simply take that as a signal that they didn't quite receive our message and that somehow we need to package it a different way. So the idea, therefore, being that we need to develop flexibility in our communication. Now, for a moment, I know there are quite a lot of people who are with us today. And so I'm going to assume that there might be some Americans in the room. Let me assure you that this next story I'm about to tell is not targeted at you. The fact that you are actually attending this means you are enlightened and you understand communication. I'm talking about a very rare American. I'm sure some of you know or have encountered these people. They wear these very loud tourist shirts, big cameras, big hats. Have you ever seen one of those? And they go into a country, they visit a country where the local people don't actually speak very much English. So I want you to imagine, for a moment, right? So there's this tourist, and this tourist is going to the local, okay? And the tourist is going, where's the bathroom? And of course, the local has no idea what he's talking about. So the local goes, okay, bathroom? And the tourist goes, where's the bathroom? Okay. Where's the, as if slowing down and speaking louder is going to break the language barrier. Now, we may laugh at that. But if we were honest with ourselves, how many of us, when we do something that doesn't work, we just do the same thing, harder, stronger, faster? Right? There's a definition of insanity. It's attributed to Einstein, but in today's internet age, I never know who it really comes from. But I believe that the saying is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. In mediation and communication, what we want to do is develop different ways of talking to somebody, different ways of approaching that communication. So if I say to Shirin, Shirin, I love you, and that doesn't do it, maybe I should try flowers. Maybe you should try chocolates. Maybe you should try a diamond ring. I'm looking at Shirin now to see if any of those hit. I think the diamond ring might have hit, or maybe the chocolates, but we'll see. Yeah? Right? So my invitation to you is to remember these 4 things whenever you are either mediating or you're engaged in any kind of communication. By the way, these help in personal relationships as well. The map is not the territory. It's not what you intend. It's the response you get. Take that as feedback and learn to develop flexibility in your communication. So here's your first takeaway. Here's your first takeaway. In mediation, always check the map against the territory. Always check the map against the territory. And what I mean by that is this. You will hear parties say things like, he doesn't care about me or the children. He doesn't care about the relationship. He's irresponsible, right? You might hear things like that, right? Now, it doesn't matter if it's a family matter or it's a commercial matter, right? You will hear words like that. The clue is when you hear a word that is ambiguous, abstract, like irresponsible, does not care. We think we understand what that means. But my invitation to you is saying, pause for a moment, don't assume. You understand what you think that means, but you may not actually know what they mean. Always ask, when you say X, whatever X is, what do you mean? So for example, I might say to Bridget, when you say irresponsible, what do you mean? When you say he doesn't care, how do you know? What do you mean? In what ways does he not care? Right? Because one of the most personal lessons that I've taken away from this is when I talk to people. Somebody once said to me, he hurt me. He hurt me. And I saw a bruise on her arm. And I immediately interpreted that as she was being battered. She was being physically hit, physically abused. Fortunately, my NLP training kicked in, and I said, well, I'm very sorry to hear that, he hurt you. When you say he hurt you, what do you mean? And she said, to my surprise, he looked at me with the side of his eyes And I said, what? Because I thought she was being hit. And she goes, no, he looked at me with the side of his eyes. And I said, oh, so he looked at you funny. She goes, exactly. I said, oh, then sorry if you don't mind me asking, how did you get that bruise? She says, I walked into a lamppost. It's very embarrassing, but no, he looked at me funny. And then I went, oh, okay. So if I did not check, I would have proceeded on as if this was a situation that she might need some kind of protection. But in actuality, it was really how she perceived things. And so that was one very important lesson I learned very early on as a mediator. And I remember this to this day, and I just want to share that with you. Okay, so that's the first application. Check the map against the territory. Check the map against the territory. Okay, now the next thing I like to do is we've already talked about how we take in information, right? Visen very clearly said visual through sight, auditory, hearing, kinesthetic through touch, olfactory to smell, gustatory through taste. This is how we know reality exists, right? Folks, I'm gonna ask you to do an experiment for the moment, if you don't mind. This is a new experiment. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna ask you to think of something, all right? So all you gotta do is just think of it, all right? All of you gotta do is think of it, right? Okay, so clear your minds. That was fast. Folks, I'd like you to think of a dog. Okay, got it? Got it. Now, I won't have a chance to do a survey, but how many of you out there, when I told you to think of a dog, you saw a picture or a movie of a dog? Anybody? Picture, movie of a dog? Yeah, yeah, yeah. How many of you heard the dog barking? Anybody? Nobody heard the dog barking. Interesting. Or maybe some did. I see some hands, virtual hands. That's great. You can use virtual hands, please. That's great. How many of you felt the dog, like when you were stroking the dog? Anyone? Yeah, some of you did. Great. Now, those of you who own dogs, this next question you will understand completely. How many of you smelled the dog? Especially if they haven't been bathed in a while, they have a smell. They have a smell. All right. Now we're back down to the fifth sense, the last sense. I'm not gonna use that last sense because I'm assuming, and you know the terrible thing they say about Chinese, that we eat everything. Right? You guys know the joke that they say Adam and Eve couldn't have been Chinese because we would have simply eaten the serpent. Yeah. So I'm not gonna ask you about that fifth sense. Yeah, Baha's laughing. That's all great, man. Go ahead. So the reality is that we take in information in 5 ways, but we represent information to ourselves in 1 of 6 ways. We can either see a dog and or hear a dog and or feel a dog and or maybe taste, but let's not go there, and or smell a dog. And some of you may have seen the word DOG in your mind. I'm not going to ask you who it was, because I know that I'm one of those people. When you tell me, think of a dog, I saw the word DOG. Right? I didn't see the picture. I didn't see any of that. Right? I noticed with my great sensory acuity that somebody has actually raised their hand. Mr. Chaudhry, if it's a quick question, I'm happy to take it. But if not, could I invite you to hold your questions right till the end? Is that all right? I will take silence for assent. Excellent. So we take in information in 5 ways. We represent it to ourselves in 6 ways. So here comes then the application number 2. Application number 2. Okay. Because we represent information to ourselves in 1 of 6 ways, we have a preferred way of doing it. We have a preferred way of doing it. The majority of the world are what we call visually oriented. They take in information visually, they represent it to themselves visually. This is why PowerPoint is so powerful. Right? There are a lot of people actually prefer to have PowerPoints. I actually like teaching without PowerPoints, but I've learned the hard way that somehow it satisfies participants when you have a PowerPoint. right? So when we say communicate to somebody's preferred channel, it requires you to do two things. Number one, identify their system, what we call their representational system. And number two, package information in that system. Package information in that system, right? So if you imagine for a moment, I'm pretty sure many of you here speak more than one language, right? I speak one very, very well, and the rest are kind of not close enough. I can get in trouble in those languages in the countries that they're from. Okay, but how many of you have noticed that when you are talking to somebody in a secondary language, like French, when I speak in French, which is not a primary language for me, not a first language for me, it's actually very tiring. Because what I have to do is I have to hear somebody speak in French, do a translation inside my head, and then represent it to myself in English. And then, of course, when I want to communicate, I think in English, convert it to French, and then deliver it most of the time, much to the unhappiness of the French person I'm speaking with, because I'm obviously not pronouncing it right. All right. Okay. Now, it is the same with what we call representational systems. So let's say, for example, Shirin is a visual person. So let's say she's got a hole in her head, it's like a circle. Bridget is, let's say, an auditory person, and she has a hole in her head like a square, right? If Shirin talks to Bridget in circles, it will be very tiring for Bridget because it may not fit, it doesn't fit the hole. It's just the wrong shape, and vice versa. So it makes sense if I wanted to facilitate communication, that if I wanted to communicate with Shirin, I will speak to her and package my communication as a circle, so it goes in. And when I communicate with Bridget, I'll package it as a square, so it goes in. And maybe Sangeeta has a triangle, and I'll package it as a triangle, right? Now, you understand this as a metaphor, right? We don't have holes in our heads apart from our ears, eyes, and noses and mouth. We don't have holes in our heads, but the fact is that we speak according to our representational system. So for example, I'm sure you have heard people say, I don't see what you're saying. Or I'm sure you've heard people saying, that doesn't sound right. Or I'm sure you've heard people saying, I can't get a grip on this. Or I'm sure you've heard people saying, I don't understand this. The words that they use, what we call predicates, sense-based words, like visual senses, see, view, look, find, show. Auditory words, listen, hear, sound, ask, talk. Kinesthetic words, grasp, hold, handle, feel, grip. And what we call digital words, these are what we call unspecified. So they're not connected with a sense. Seem, think, know, understand, sense, right? These are all linguistic clues that tell you how they're processing information at that point in time. Now, let me be clear. Nobody is only visual. We are all of these things at different points. But at any point in time, we have a preferred system and we are using that point. So for example, if somebody says to me, I don't see what you're saying, it doesn't make sense for me to reply to them in an auditory way or kinesthetic way or an unspecified way. Because by replying to them in those systems that are not theirs, it's like speaking a different language. It's difficult for them to process. So if they say, I see what you're saying, my reply will be, look, my point of view is that we need to find some way to show you how to perceive this better. So I'll be wrapping my language in visual predicates that makes it easier for them to accept. If somebody says, that doesn't sound right, I will say, listen, it sounds to me that we need to ask ourselves the right questions. Let's talk about this a little bit more and hear what each other has to say. Kinesthetic, if somebody says, it doesn't feel right, I'd say, hold on a moment. it's important that you get a good grip on the subject so that you can grasp the nuances and handle this in the course of a mediation. Finally, if someone says, I don't understand, I might say, well, it seems to me that we need to think about this a little bit more to get a better sense of what we do know. All right. So identify the representational systems to their predicates and then match them. Now, I like to acknowledge Mr. Prasad Sharma has been frantically raising his hand. I'm sorry, I needed to finish this piece before I turn to you. Sir, do you have a quick question? Or perhaps you can reserve it for later. Okay, that's fine too. That works too. Okay, so one way to identify what representational system the other person is using is to what we call sense-based words. The other way is to do this. Have you ever noticed people doing this? I don't see what you're saying. Or they will do this. It doesn't sound right. Or they will do this. It feels wrong. Or they will do this. I tell myself it doesn't make sense, right? NLP suggests that your eyes tell you a lot more than you might think. When you see people's eyes move upwards, it usually means that they are accessing the visual representational system. That's when you throw visual words at them. Just throw visual words at them. Okay? Draw them images, use PowerPoint, use the flip chart. If you see their eyes moving side to side, they're processing auditorily. Use auditory predicates. Talk it through with them. If their eyes go down and to their right, so this is their eyes, not yours, their right side, they are processing kinesthetically. Help them get a good grasp on the problem and to sieve out the solutions. If their eyes go down and to their left, they are functioning digitally, speak to them as a lawyer might, as a professor might, as a politician might. Right? Use what we call sort of disembodied language. Now, what I'd like to just let you know is that these are what we call the eye accessing patterns for a normally organized right-hander. The left-hander has the eye patterns reversed. For our purpose today, it doesn't matter. If you see their eyes go up, it's visual. If their eyes go side to side, it's auditory. If their eyes glance downwards, use unspecified. Because when you use unspecified, the person will process it however they process it. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying? Does it sound right? Does that fit for you? I think Bridget has caught on to what I was doing. Nice. Okay, so that's the second application. Enhance communication by matching their representational systems. Now, finally, and we talked a little bit about body language. So let's go into body language and in terms of what we call the elements of communication, right? Shirin has already mentioned that communication is made up of what we call the non-verbals and the verbals. I will break it up into a little bit more. Communication can be broken up into what we call physiology, how we hold our body, the tonality, the tone of our voice, and the words that we use. So remember, folks, I said to you a little bit earlier, we're going to play a game. Folks, could you write down on a piece of paper, right? What you think physiology, what percentage physiology comprises, what percentage tonality comprises, and what percentage words comprises. Okay, so go ahead and do that now. I'll give you maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute. Okay, don't worry about getting the right answer. All I'm just concerned about is that you you have some numbers to share because I'm going to ask you to share those numbers. Okay, I'm going to ask you to share those numbers. I'm also going to ask you to share those numbers through the chat box and in a very specific way. So please bear with me. I'm going to share a different document. Folks, you should be able to see a Word document now that says components of communication. What I'm going to try to do is try to get the two extremes of each of these variables. All right. Okay, so I want to find the lowest number for physiology that you may have, and I want to find the highest number for physiology that you may have. Right, I'm going to start off with physiology first, and if somebody could give me a number for physiology. Okay, freeze 30%. Let's go. Anyone has lower than 30% for physiology? Lower than 30%. Just type it in, 30%. Anyone lower? Lower than 30%. Lower than 30% for physiology. Okay, 10%. I got 10%. All right. 10 seems to be the lowest. Anybody lower than 10%? Okay, no. All right, excellent, excellent. I'm going to type 10%. Now I'm going to go to the higher end of the scale. I know somebody put 60. Anyone has higher than 60 for physiology? Anyone higher than 60? Just type that in. 75 for physiology. Okay, cool. Anyone higher than 75? No one higher than 75? Okay, so we have physiology. Let's go to tonality. We have 50% for tonality. Who's got lower than 50%? Who's got lower than 50%? 20%, 20%. Anyone lower than 20%? Lower than 20%? 15%. We've got 15% going once. 15% going twice. 12% going twice. Going once. Anyone lower than 12? 10%. This is like an auction. Folks, you don't get a prize. Okay, 10%. 10% for tonality. Who's got higher than 50% for tonality? Higher than 50%. Just type that in. 50%, 60%. Bridget, thank you for that. 60%, 60%. Anyone has 65? 80% from Ankit. 80%. Anyone higher than 75%? 75%. Anyone higher than 75%? Anyone higher than 75% going once? Going 80% sold. Anyone higher than 80%? Okay, I think that's 85. Oh, there's some competition going on here. I tell you what. Okay, I'm going to stick with 85. I'm going to stick with 85. Now let's go to words. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know it's only words, but words are all I have to take your heart away. No, okay, who's got a number for words? 20%. Who's got lower? 10%. Anyone lower than 10%? And lower than 10% for words. 10% for words. Anyone lower? Lower than anyone going once? 5% to Shirin. Anyone lower than 5%? Okay, the 5 is pretty low already. And who's got higher than, I think, 40%? 40%. Who's got higher than 40? 40 going once. Who's got higher than 40? 50, 50, 80, 80. Anyone higher than 80%? 80% going once, going twice. I think we have 80%. Excellent, 80%. All right, folks, that's good enough. Thank you. Please, thank you for your participation. Please don't type anything else in. Now, you will see that these numbers obviously don't add up to 100%. Okay, but I wanted you to see what the extremes were and where your figures fell within. Let me now give you the proper figures. Drum roll. These figures came from a study that was done in the 70s by Albert Mehrabian. If we had time, I would tell you a lot more about this study, but we don't. But essentially, all I want to say is that physiology is significantly more than tonality. Tonality is significantly more than words, right? And when your nonverbals, which is physiology and tonality, do not match your words, people will believe your nonverbals. That's how we generally know somebody is lying. We realize that their body language is not, or rather, I'm sorry, their nonverbals, physiology and tonality, is not congruent with the words. If you ask somebody, are you confident? And they say, I think so. There's an incongruence there. The words may say that they are confident. The tonality does not. The body language may or may not support it, depending. Right? Is there something you'd like to share with me before we move on? And if you look at their body language and they go, no, no. Chances are there's something they want to share with you. They're just maybe not comfortable sharing in joint session. Right? So you're constantly looking for congruence in your communication. Shirin, I see your hand up.
Yeah. I wanted to know whether there would be a difference depending upon the culture. The percentages.
Oh, okay. I will tell you that the study that gave you these figures was a study of primarily white men. Okay, so those of you who are the ladies of the world, those of you who are non-white in the world, will probably say, yeah, these figures don't really work. But my experience is across the world, the non-verbals always override words. The non-verbals always override words. The exception I have found is in people who are neurodivergent. So for example, I have friends who are on what we call the spectrum, right? They may have Asperger's, they're high functioning, but they may have Asperger's, for example, right? Those will be people that actually don't pay that much attention to the non-verbal. So when they communicate, they pay a lot of attention to the words, right? So we have to be sensitive towards neurodivergent people, okay? However, in the ordinary course of things, physiology and tonality generally are a higher percentage than words, which troubles lawyers because we as lawyers, we spend our entire life studying words and thinking about the right words, and then I'm telling you it's 7%. Some of you are going, seriously, I hate you, but life happens, okay? But don't get me wrong, the 7% is still very important. What we say is important, how we say it is also important, okay? Now, I wanted to just very quickly highlight for your attention that in NLP, we draw a distinction between two models of body language, what we call traditional and systemic. The traditional model, most of you will be familiar with. So what we call body language is, it tends towards interpretation, right? You say that if people cross their arms, it means they're negative. If they cross their legs, it means they're negative. If for example, they turn their body away from you, they don't like you. If they touch their nose when they speak, they're lying, okay? These are common body language examples. The reality of it is we never really know what any body language actually means. We could say it is cultural specific, we could say it's gender specific, but to be honest, it is individual specific. So what you need to actually look for is use it as an indicator. Don't assume that it actually means anything. Always check. So one way I will use the traditional model body language is if I see incongruence in the communication. I've talked about that already. But if I say something and I see somebody shifts their body language, I don't assume I know what that means. All I know is it's an opportunity for me to ask. I might stop talking and I might look at them and say, okay, I've spoken for a little while. Do you have any questions? Do you have any reactions? And give them an opportunity to actually check in, right? Now, that's the traditional model of body language. NLP uses what we call the systemic model of body language. And I can go a lot into the systemic model of body language, but fundamentally it is non-interpretive. It's used to create rapport, first by pacing, then by leading. So let me give you a very quick example. Folks, can you remember a time when you spoke, we were having a great conversation with a friend and you were getting along like a house on fire? I think that's what the saying is, right? And have you ever noticed that when you and your friend you're really getting along, when you have deep rapport, you are actually seated in very similar ways. Your hands are moving in the same ways. You're probably using the same words. You're probably speaking at the same speed. Because the rule is that when you have rapport, your body language synchronizes. But the opposite is also true. When you deliberately synchronize your body language, you can create rapport. And we do this in NLP via the process of matching, mirroring, or crossover pacing. Now, there's a lot I can say about this, and I won't because I know our time is short. But essentially, Bridget, could you do me a favor? Is that you don't have to unmute yourself. Could you raise your left hand and just keep it raised? Okay, so that's Bridget left hand. Okay, if I wanted to match Bridget, I would raise my left hand. If I want to mirror Bridget, I would raise my right hand, as if we were looking in a mirror. All right, thank you, Bridget. You may lower your hand now. Thank you so much. So matching and mirroring is basically arranging your body language such that it paces. It's not exactly the same, but it is a little bit like the person you're trying to build rapport with. I'll give you a cautionary word a little bit later, but for the moment, just remember, matching and mirroring is about organizing your body language in a way that estimates theirs. Crossover pacing is slightly different. So for example, again, I'm going to use Bridget as an example, if you don't mind. Bridget, what I'd like you to do is I'm going to talk to you. Could you nod your head as I talk to you? I mean, it's perfectly natural for that to happen. Is that all right? So Bridget, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm really pleased that you took the time to sign in. I hope you're finding this conversation helpful. Now, you will notice that Bridget is nodding her head at a certain pace. The pace at which someone nods their head and even blinks their eyes is representative of the speed at which they are processing information inside. It's like the timing belt. So if she is nodding her head at this pace, and I'm speaking very, very quickly, it will be a disjoint for her. I will be out of rapport with her. I need to tune into Bridget's rhythm. So I need to speak at a pace at which Bridget is processing that information. Does that make sense? Yes, yes, right? And this is what we call crossover pacing. In other words, using one part of our body or behavior to match or mirror a different part of their behavior. That's why it's crossover, right? She's nodding her head. I'm not nodding my head at the same time because it look very weird, right? But if she's nodding her head, when I speak, I will speak at her pace. Yeah, right? So application number 3 then is to build non-verbal rapport. Here is the caution. And what are the ways that we can build non-verbal rapport? Well, just very quickly, you can match someone's posture, whether they're standing, whether their arms are crossed, whether they're leaning back, they're leaning forward, whether their legs are crossed, and so on and so forth. You can match their gesture. When people talk, they gesture, right? Here's a very important clue. Do not gesture when they are talking, because they will think you are crazy. Gesture when you are talking, the way that they were gesturing. Okay. Facial expression. When people smile, most of the time our instinct is to smile back. I don't know if you ever sort of seen a friend from across a distance, you look at them and then suddenly you raise your eyebrows. And then the other side raises their eyebrows and you like make that instant connection. Facial expressions. And finally, you can match someone's breathing. Now, you will notice of these 4 items, I have put asterisks next to the first 3 because those are the easiest to match. Breathing, not so much. Okay, that takes a little bit of practice, that takes a little bit of skill, and we're not going to talk too much about that. Okay, but fundamentally, we can match someone's posture, gestures, or facial expression. Now, here's the caution that I said I was going to share with you. When you are a mediator, do not match parties' postures. You can match their gesture, you can match their facial expression. Do not match the parties' postures. And the reason for that is very simple. If both parties are sitting in different postures and you are matching one more than the other, they may interpret your body language as meaning that you are not impartial. that you have lost your neutrality. So as Shirin said a little bit earlier, when you're a mediator, your body language must be open, equal, neutral. And so this is the caution I would say, do not match postures when you're mediating. When I'm negotiating, I match everything if I can. Does that make sense, folks? If you're in a private session, a caucus, by all means, match the posture. But when you're in joint session, do not match posture. Fair enough? Fair enough? Okay. The other thing you can match, elements of voice. The one thing I will ask you to match really is tempo. Tempo. How fast or slow? And specifically, I've already mentioned, adjust your speed to the rate at which they are nodding their head or the rate at which they are blinking. Okay. Now, so that pretty much are the two things that I wanted to talk to. I'll just quickly look through all of these comments. Thank you very much for all the various shout outs. Great. And so I'm wondering whether you have any questions, and I'm just going to stop sharing, and Shirin, I'll turn it over to you to manage the questions.
Joel, thank you so much for this extremely interesting talk. It was really very erudite and very, very different and interesting. I think it's a completely new field. Thank you so much for many of us.
Most welcome.
As far as the questions are concerned, just give me a second. Okay. Do I have the first question? Okay, so I think I have from Soham Shrisht. Firstly, there's a comment from him. He says, during the session, it seemed at times the sense of humor was at its peak. My question to you is, how does multilinguistic origins of parties could be a barrier in mediating successfully?
Yeah. So language can be both unifying and a barrier, right? On the assumption that you actually speak the different languages of the parties, that's helpful. Sometimes you may want to use a translator. However, it doesn't stop you from actually building systemic rapport. Systemic rapport, as far as NLP has been able to discover, is relatively universal. Universal as in around the people on this planet. So when you build rapport with them, when you understand that that's how humans process information, you can actually build rapport with them. As for language, I would be very careful, especially when using metaphors. So as a native speaker of English, as many of us are, we tend to use terms of expression, metaphors, actually without realizing they're metaphors, right? And sometimes they don't translate very, very well. So when you're mediating across different languages, my advice is to keep it as simple as possible, as direct as possible, as descriptive as possible. You can go for abstraction, but you probably need to explain what you mean by those abstractions. Now, I know that probably is an incomplete answer to what is a very complex question, but I hope that's given you some ideas. So I'm sure, I'm glad you like the sense of humor. I hate to tell you that was not it at its peak. I was simply behaving today.
The next question will be by my co-host, Sanjay Visen. But Sanjay, you want to unmute yourself?
Next question to Mr. Joel is one of the question: if a party is not able to communicate at all, how to manage it?
Okay, so I'm not sure what that means. I mean, is it because they can't speak the language? Is it because they cannot speak? Is that because they don't have the capacity? I mean, well, I'm not sure what that means. So I'm gonna put into application something I shared with you. When you say they cannot communicate, what do you mean?
Sanjay, we could ask the person to maybe just speak up.
Oh, Sunita, right? They cannot speak. They cannot speak. So then my question is, are they able to communicate in any other way? Can they write? Can they sign, for example? Can they make their wishes known to somebody who can speak? Right? Because I mean, we can imagine somebody who is in persistent vegetative state. We can imagine that, right? But then again, that's pretty much an extreme example. Right? If the language is the part for the party speak is different from the mediators, no, then I would say bring in a good translator, or maybe recuse yourself as a mediator and pick somebody else. Right? And that may not be ideal, but if your goal is to help the parties, maybe that's the idea.
There is a question from Dr. Shubhashish. In online dispute resolution mechanism, how physiology finds its relevance?
Cool. So everyone's been talking about COVID and online mediation, and a lot of people say, online mediation, we can't see body language. Actually, that's nonsense. I mean, it's terrible, right? So I can see Bridget leaning back. I can see Seema touching her glasses. Right? I can see Renjin walking around, but I'm not looking because that's making me dizzy. Right? So I can see actually people's movement side to side. I can certainly see the tilt of the head. Right? So I cannot see their legs, fair enough. But taking into account that many people who are on Zoom don't actually wear pants, probably a good thing. Right? But here's the one thing that people don't realize on Zoom. I may not be able to see the rest of your body, but I can actually see your micro expressions. I can see things about your face that when I'm in real life, face to face with you, I may not see, right? So those are things that can give me cues and clues. Now, but some of you are saying, well, then how do I match them online? It's simple. When I talk to them, I can see them nodding. I can see them blinking. In fact, it's powerful enough that I can actually spotlight them, not for everyone, but for myself. I can pin them and I see them in all of their glory, right? So as when you mediate online, you have to adapt. There are some things you cannot do online that you can do face-to-face, but there are a lot of things you can do online that actually being face-to-face makes it harder for you to do. So it's about leveraging the medium that you're currently on.
Sanjay,
Okay, I hope that helps. Yeah.
In fact, I think the next question is from Ankit, which possibly is already covered by your answer, but I'll just read out the question.
Okay.
What's your view on online mediation, taking into consideration the aspect of verbal and non-verbal communication?
Yep, done. Asked and answered. See, yeah. You like the way I read your mind? Okay, just kidding.
Sanjay, would you like to take the next question?
You carry on, Shirin.
Okay, there's a question from Shalini Mishra. Is the language the parties speak, if the language the parties speak is different from what the mediators know, what should one do?
Could you say that again?
If the language that the parties speak is different from the language that the mediator knows, what should be done?
I might have mentioned this already, but if I haven't, get a good translator. Okay, get a good translator, not just somebody who understands the language, but who understands the cultural nuances of those languages, right? Because it's more than just, not just about talking. It's not just about, what did he say and how do I put that in a different language? A lot of the communication, if we accept that the large percentage of communication, 93% of it, is non-verbal and it's affected by culture, then your translator needs to have cultural nuance.
Joel, would you also suggest that maybe they could change the mediator, request for a change of mediator, or in fact, the mediator could possibly do that herself?
Yes. So if if a translator is not possible, but a mediator is available who can speak both languages, that might still be the better way, because things get lost in translation, essentially. I've worked with translators before, and I know a little bit about the language. When the translator tells me what they said, and I go, I don't think that's what they said, but then I know to check, right? Then I know to check. But it's one of those things.
Right.
Right.
Sanjay, would you like to take the question by Sunita Chaudhary?
Carry on, I'm not able to.
You're not able to see that? Okay, I'll just take that question. So Sunita Chaudhary asks, if a party is not able to communicate at all, how do we deal with them?
Oh, I think we covered that, Shirin.
Yes, I
yeah.
think so. That's what she brought up.
Yeah.
Is there another question? Okay. So this is a question from Shobha. Do the
Yes.
non-verbal communication help to avoid hostility, considering the cultural characteristics to ensure that all parties understand each other?
The simple answer to the question is yes. The slightly more complex answer to that is it depends. It depends, right? Parties come in, they're going to be hostile towards one another in varying degrees. Hopefully, they're not hostile to you, because that will be a problem. And hopefully, they'll at least be neutral to you, but they will be hostile to one another, right? And I think initially you have to use your words and your non-verbals to actually get the parties to talk to you first, to de-escalate what they are feeling before you try to rebuild the bridge between the two parties. And maybe that may not always be possible, but we can try. Okay, but certainly a lot of the time, you will want to use your body language to support de-escalating any kind of hostility. So if somebody is shouting and your voice gets all squeaky and your body language looks uptight and you're telling them, calm down, that's probably not going to work. Okay, but if you do say to them, I can see you feel very strongly about this, and I know it's important to you. When you speak at that speed, I can't hear you, I'm afraid. I process it a little bit slowly. Could you just slow down for a moment and tell me what is the matter from your perspective? And then you slow it down, right? And so your body language must support what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, Sanjay.
Mr. Lee, there is a
Yes.
question for you by Ms. Pushp Gupta. She asked, can you please elaborate a little more on eye assessing cues as to the kinesthetic and auditory digitals?
Sure. So kinesthetic is feelings. And when I say feelings, I don't actually mean emotions. They could be emotions, but feelings is what, the sensation, proprioception, right? Auditory digital down here for me is what we mean words that are not connected to any kind of five senses. So for example, when you say think, you can think visually, auditory, kinesthetically. It's not connected to anything, right? So when people talk to themselves a lot, you know how you folks have a voice in your head and you talk to yourself? Yeah, many people have that. 50 years ago, if you admitted you had that, they would institutionalize you. Today, that's okay. It's perfectly fine. And there are some of you right now in the audience who are saying, I don't talk to myself. That's the voice, right? Okay. So when you talk to yourself, you're basically just having a conversation. That's your auditory digital. Okay. So when you talk to yourself, you're telling yourself, I'll never be able to do that. Okay. I'm not as good as anybody else. That's your self-talk, your internal voice. Conversely, you could be telling yourself, I'm the most attractive person on the face of this earth. I'll be able to do anything. I believe I can. Right? That too is your internal voice. Okay. Usually the internal voice is what we call a secondary system. It is separate from your senses. Right? So when your eyes go down and to my left, I'm processing digitally, I would call digitally, and I'm going down to my right, processing kinesthetically. If you're left-handed, it's flipped over so that it's digital, kinesthetic. From your perspective, as I said a little bit earlier, don't worry. Your eyes go down, use digital. That's the hack. That's the hack. It goes down, use digital. Okay. If this was a formal training, I would literally have you guys be looking at each other's eyes, but we won't. It's not. Yep, Visen, sorry. Sanjay.
There is another question by Mr. Anand Kumar. He asked how to react during mediation to the intimidation done through the body language or eye contact by the counterpart.
Well, depends on who they're trying to intimidate.
How to react during mediation to the intimidation done through the body language or eye contact by the counterpart.
Right. My question is, who is that party trying to intimidate? The other party or you?
That is the question asked by one of the attendees.
I understand. But all I'm saying is that if the person is trying to intimidate the other person through their body language, okay, which I assume to be the case, because if they were trying to intimidate you, I'd be worried. Okay. What I would generally do is, well, depends. You've got to make a judgment call. Is there going to be violence or not? Right? If there's going to be violence, you might actually have to call in for help. I've mediated situations before where there was a security guard outside. Okay. If it's not going to be that kind of violence, but it looks like it's not going to work out, you might actually want to go for a private session fairly early on, just to get a feeling for the parties, de-escalate them first. If it doesn't look to be like it's going to break up at any point, what I might actually do is I might actually try to get that person to talk to me. Right? Get that person to talk to me so that they will have to change their body language vis-a-vis me. Right? And then a lot of the time it may depend on what purpose they have in trying to intimidate the other person. Right? And here's a very important thing from NLP's perspective. It looks like they're trying to intimidate, but they may not be their intention. I'll give you a very quick example from my life. My wife, her powers of concentration are legendary. The problem is when she's thinking very hard about something, she looks incredibly fierce. And when she's looking in my direction, I think I've done something wrong. And it's my fault. And I freak the heck out. And then I stew on it for a couple of hours. Then 2 hours later, I gather enough courage to ask my wife, did I do something wrong? And she says, what? I said, you look upset with me 2 hours ago. She goes, no. And then when you finally backtrack it and retrack it, all that, she was actually thinking very hard about some problems she faced at work. Right? So I'm not going to assume that when somebody adopts a body language that it's intimidating. It looks intimidating. I got to make a judgment call. I think if violence is going to happen, I need to intervene. But I'm not going to necessarily assume that. Some people just hold their bodies a certain way. Some people believe that if I don't make eye contact with you, if I don't gaze at you intensely, I'm not showing you, that we are equal. So I'm not giving you respect. Right? There are many, many things that are a bit strange that way. I hope that helps. I mean, a lot of the time I'm not sort of guessing at what the intent of your question is.
Another question is for you, sir. Where can we get proper training in NLP?
A bit hard to say. I know there are many NLP trainers in India and in various jurisdictions all over the world. There are, and I regret to say this, that there are some people who are not as good as others. All right, as with any profession, as with any training course, there are some that are better, some that are not so good. Okay, my advice to you is to do your market research, see if you can get reviews, judge the quality of the website, see whether they've got anything that's up on YouTube. Get a sense of what their teaching style is and how long they've been at it, what are their credentials, right? And it's important that you get good training, but you need to do your due diligence in figuring out whether the person you're looking at is good or not, right? The nice thing about the internet right now and because of COVID is we can actually get very good training with people who are overseas. I'm not talking about myself. I'm actually talking about people in the US. You can actually train with some of the best NLP trainers in the US, okay, virtually, right? Because they've pivoted to a digital platform, right? So the opportunities have opened up as well. Yeah.
Shirin, you may continue.
So there's a question from Mr. N.K. Rajput, which I think we missed out. Sorry, we missed it out earlier. He says, is there a right balance in the elements of communication? You know, the three elements, physiology, tonality, and words. Can it depend upon the situation? Would it change according to the situation?
Sure. So if I'm communicating by email, I generally won't have a chance to use tonality that much. I have to pay more attention to words, right? Physiology, strangely enough, I can do a bit of, you know, how people put smiley faces in their emails, right? That's their attempt to replicate body language, right? Okay. Sometimes, for example, if someone, I'm speaking to someone on the phone, I'm speaking to somebody on the phone, obviously I cannot see their body language, but actually just from hearing, you can actually get a sense of people's moods. You can actually hear body languages. I know it sounds very strange, but you can hear body language, right? Okay, you can hear when you can actually sometimes you can actually hear them sit down, for example, or stand up, or you hear them pace, right? Or when they're agitated, right? So don't sometimes the percentages change, but if we look at communication generally, we can say that non-verbals override verbals. That's and what you need to do is have congruence in your communication.
Thank you. I think that would answer the question. There's another question from Afreen Chaudhary. She says, I believe that people are very vocal and forthcoming with their thoughts today. They are outspoken, for which reason I tend to perceive their words more than their physiology, tonality, etc., as a representation of their wishes, their opinions, and thoughts. Would you think that this is a good idea, given how oncoming generations communicate, or shall we rely more upon non-verbal cues, as the study suggests?
That's actually a very interesting question. There is some research to indicate that younger people, the younger generation, I don't know what they're called, zillennials, whatever, these folks are far more comfortable texting, right? It doesn't mean they don't use nonverbals, by the way. They use emojis. They use stickers. They use GIFs. Don't assume that they don't use nonverbals. Now, you may say to yourself, well, hang on, when they're texting, how can they use tone? Well, if you have teenage children, they will tell you that if you reply them and you put a full stop after your reply, it indicates you are upset. Now, in my generation, I put a full stop because it's grammatically correct, damn it. We must use punctuation. But for them, if you reply okay, that's okay. If you reply okay, full stop, it means you're upset. Go figure, right? And so they even have their ways of representing tone in text, right? So maybe the medium will change, but the importance of being able to get cues outside of just words, I think will remain important, regardless of the medium.
Thank you, Joel. Joel, there's one hand raised of Jamshed Bey. Jamshed, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, Jamshed.
Hi. I'm already unmute. I was waiting for my turn for quite some time now.
Sorry, Jamshed.
Mr. Lee, I have a practical problem in which I thought I'll request you for some guidance. I have a mediation between a special couple. Now the difficulty is that either I am unable to hear them properly, or I have difficulty in understanding their language. They speak English, no doubt, but the husband's language is quite incoherent type of thing. If I ask them to repeat, so husband becomes aggressive. I'm trying to keep my cool to the maximum possible limits. So if you can give me some tips how to handle that, because it is the mediation session is coming up again on 25th of August when they are physically.
So, but my question to you is, when you say that he's incoherent, what do you mean?
The words spoken, I cannot make out the words spoken by them.
So when he speaks, you can't either hear the words or you don't understand the words. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes. No, I hear them, but I don't understand them.
Okay, him or them?
Some of them.
So you don't understand the woman as well?
No, woman is quite coherent.
Okay, cool. So I think the first thing you need to probably use or change in your mindset is replace the words coherent and incoherent.
Yes.
Because I think what you're saying is that you are unable to hear what he's saying. You are unable to understand what he's saying. Doesn't mean he's incoherent. Yes. It just means you don't get what he's trying to say, right? Now, if it's the fact that somehow his pronunciation isn't right or that you can't hear him clearly, is he able to write it down?
Till now, we have been on online sessions.
Right.
For the first time, they'll be with me physically on 25th of August.
Okay. So couple of possibilities. The first possibility is actually he may have gotten hostile to you, or you interpret it as hostile because he probably was a little bit either tired of being asked to repeat himself.
Yes.
Okay. Or he felt that you weren't getting it. Or maybe he was simply frustrated that, the online medium wasn't working quite so well. Okay. It could be any of those things.
Yes.
That led him to, act in a way that you have interpreted as hostile. So what I would suggest is when you meet them for the first time,
yes,
take some time to get to know them. Take some time to make a personal connection with both of them.
Yes.
Right. It may be that when he speaks with you in person, it might be easier to understand. It might be. It might be that you want to get a couple of pads and pens ready, and ask them to write down the things that are important to them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's not to say tell me your story by writing it down. You say before you tell me your story, can you just write down a list of things that's really important to you?
Yes.
And use that as a series of talking points, right? That's also another possibility. Another possibility is actually break into a private session. Okay, and if you still feel that the husband's a little bit hostile to you, what I might actually lead with is when I speak to the husband privately, I might actually say, you know what, I feel like I owe you an apology, right? And the reason. Yeah, and the reason is because when we're doing it over Zoom, I know I asked you to repeat yourself so many times. I know it must have been very frustrating for you, and I apologize. It's only because I wanted to understand your side of the story, and I was having difficulty hearing.
Hi, Sean.
I heard that. So I mean, those are some suggestions I have for you. Obviously, they may work, they may not work. Okay, but fundamentally, I think what is going to be a significant change is that you will be talking to them face to face.
Yes, I'm planning to have a joint session in the beginning. Then I'll be talking to them separately, and I'm planning to give some more time for the husband rather than wife, because wife is very clear about whatever she wants.
Be careful that when you do that, I know your intention is a positive one, but be careful that when you do that, you don't give the impression that you're favoring one side over the other.
Yes, that is always there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the suggestions.
I hope that helps. Good luck.
Good luck.
Well, thank you so much for taking all those questions. I would like to convey Nivaran's great sense of gratitude to you for your very erudite talk today. May I ask my co-host, Mr. Sanjay Visen, to please give the concluding remarks. Thank you so much, Joel.
Thank you.
Namaste. And thankful to the Nivaran and especially Jitendra Sharma sir, Rajiv Datta sir, Rajesh Khanna sir, to give me an opportunity for this closing remarks. And it has been a pleasure, and I express my gratitude to Mr. Joel Lee to share such a valuable and experienced knowledge, which all are beneficiary to this session. And I hope that everybody has enjoyed this session with so knowledge and live example by the Lee sir. And especially the education session regarding the NLP model and communication effectiveness in mediation, it will truly help to all the mediators who have joined the session. Now I hand over to Shirin. Thank you.
Shirin, unmute yourself. Shirin, unmute
Shirin ma'am, you are muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Sanjay. If Jawad is here, I just wanted to thank him for introducing Joel to us. Jawad, thank you so much. I would also like to thank Rahul, who's been the backbone for the IT for these talks. Thank you, Rahul. He's a recent pass out of the law school from Dehradun. Jawad, are you there? Okay. Thank you so much once again, Joel. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Been mine. Pleasure's been mine. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. It was a very nice talk and very enlightening.
I'm glad it was helpful. Everyone have a great evening, and please keep safe. Take care of yourself.
And once again, your happy Independence Day, Singapore.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To you and your family.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Again, congratulations on your National Day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye.
We need to stop the recording, I think. Rahul?